My name is Ethan Clark, and I'm a graphic designer living in the heart of the city. My days are filled with endless deadlines, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the constant buzz of notifications demanding my attention. Sometimes the noise gets so overwhelming that I long to escape, even if just for a weekend. When my uncle Harold called me out of the blue and invited me to stay at his countryside house while he was away, I jumped at the chance. I needed a break, a chance to breathe in fresh air and clear my cluttered mind. Harold's place was tucked away in a remote corner of the countryside, miles from the nearest town. The last time I'd seen him was a few years ago at a family gathering, where he'd been the quiet one in the corner, content with his solitude. Our conversations were always brief, but his invitation felt genuine, and I appreciated the chance to reconnect, even if it was just through the shared silence of his home. When I arrived, the sun was dipping low behind rolling hills, casting long shadows across the winding dirt road that led to his house. The cottage itself was a charming, weathered structure with whitewashed walls and a steeply pitched roof dotted with moss. It looked like something out of a storybook, simple, sturdy, and inviting. The garden was wild but tended with care, bursts of color from late-blooming flowers softening the edges of the worn stone path. I felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension as I stepped out of my car, the quiet settling around me like a thick blanket. But then my eyes caught sight of the neighbor's house just beyond the fence line. It was larger, more imposing, with dark wooden beams and shuttered windows that seemed to watch me as I moved. The property sat too close for comfort, and its shadow stretched across the edge of Harold's garden. The contrast between the two houses was stark. Harold's was open and welcoming. The neighbor's was cold and closed off. I shook off the uneasy feeling that crept up my spine, chalking it up to city nerves in a rural setting. Inside, the cottage smelled of old wood and the faint trace of lavender. Harold's belongings were sparse but thoughtfully arranged. An old leather armchair by the fireplace, stacks of dog-eared books on a rickety shelf, and a small kitchen table that looked like it had seen decades of meals and quiet conversations. The walls were decorated with black and white photos of family members I didn't recognize, their eyes seeming to hold the weight of stories untold. As I unpacked my bag, I noticed how still everything was. No distant cars, no honking horns, no chatter from nearby houses, just the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by the evening breeze. The silence was profound and unfamiliar, and I found myself missing the city's constant hum more than I expected. But I reminded myself that this was exactly why I was here, to find peace in the quiet. After setting down my things, I wandered outside to explore the grounds. The garden was charming in its imperfection. Wild patches of grass mingled with carefully cultivated herbs and flowers. Bees buzzed lazily from blossom to blossom, and the air carried the faint scent of earth and rain from earlier that day. I breathed deeply, letting the calm wash over me. From the porch, I could see the neighbor's house more clearly now, its dark silhouette framed against the deepening purple sky. The windows were shuttered tight, and no smoke rose from its chimney. It felt as though the house was holding its breath, watching silently from just out of reach. The thought made the hairs on my arms prickle, though I wasn't sure why. That night after dinner, I sat by the fireplace with a cup of tea, feeling the warmth seep into my hands. I flipped through one of Harold's old books, a collection of local folklore and tales from the region. The stories were quaint and sometimes eerie, filled with legends of forest spirits and mysterious happenings. I smiled at the thought that the countryside held secrets beyond the city's steel and glass. As the fire crackled softly, I realized how much I needed this respite. The weight of deadlines, the pressure of constant connectivity, the endless noise, all of it seemed to fall away here. For a moment I allowed myself to simply be. Just Ethan, a man in a quiet house far from the world's demands. Still, the neighbor's house lingered in the back of my mind. There was something about it, something unspoken and watchful. I told myself it was just my imagination, fueled by the stories in the book and the unfamiliar setting. After all, I was here to rest, not to conjure fears. I settled into bed early, the wooden floors creaking softly beneath me. The room was simple, with a single window that framed the night sky. The stars were clearer here, brighter than any I'd seen in the city. I let my eyes drift closed, welcoming the stillness. Yet as I lay there, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not entirely alone. Somewhere beyond the walls, in the dark and quiet, something or someone was watching. The night held its breath, and I felt the weight of unseen eyes, waiting for the weekend to unfold. Sleep came reluctantly that first night. I lay awake in the quiet darkness, listening to the house settle around me. The soft groans of aging wood, the whisper of wind brushing against the windowpane. The countryside's stillness was different from the city's noise, but it wasn't as peaceful as I'd hoped. Somewhere in the distance, the hoot of an owl punctuated the silence, a lonely sound that seemed oddly mournful. Just as I was beginning to drift off, faint footsteps echoed outside. At first, I thought it was the wind playing tricks on me, but the rhythmic crunch of gravel beneath shoes was unmistakable. The steps paced slowly, then paused, followed by low, indistinct voices carried on the cool night air. I sat up, straining to hear, but the words were too soft, muffled by the thick walls and the distance between me and the source. The voices didn't sound angry or aggressive, more like hushed whispers shared in secrecy, but their presence unsettled me. I glanced toward the window, half expecting to see a figure lurking in the shadows, but the garden lay empty under the moonlight. My heart quickened, and I wondered if the neighbor's imposing house had something to do with this nocturnal activity. What kind of people lived so close, and why were they out at such an hour talking in secret? I tried to convince myself it was nothing, maybe local farmers tending to late chores or neighbors exchanging quiet words. Small towns often held their own rhythms after all. Still, the unease clung to me, a persistent itch beneath my skin. The next morning I decided to explore a bit more, hoping daylight would clear away the shadows of my imagination. As I stepped out onto the porch, I noticed movement at the edge of my vision. A woman stood near the fence separating the two properties, her silhouette framed by the morning light. She was slender, with silver-streaked hair pulled back tightly, and her eyes held a sharpness that caught me off guard. She smiled faintly but didn't speak at first. Then, almost hesitantly, she said, "You should stay upstairs tonight." Her voice was low, barely above a whisper, as if the words themselves were a secret too heavy to share openly. "Excuse me?" I asked, stepping closer, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. "The night," she repeated, glancing toward her house. "It's safer if you stay upstairs." Her warning felt urgent yet restrained, as if she were delivering a message she wished she didn't have to. I frowned, trying to process what she meant. Is something wrong? Should I be worried? She shook her head slowly. "I can't say more. Just trust me." Then, without another word, she turned and walked back toward her house, closing the gate behind her with a soft click. I stood there, bewildered. The encounter was brief but left an impression far stronger than I expected. Who was she, and why was she so concerned? Her demeanor wasn't hostile or nosy, it was protective, almost maternal. Yet the unexplained caution in her voice sent a chill that no amount of morning sun could dispel. Throughout the day, I found myself glancing toward the neighbor's house, half expecting to see her watching from a window or lurking nearby. The property seemed even more foreboding now, its dark facade a stark contrast to Harold's warm cottage. Despite my curiosity, I tried to put the warning out of my mind. Maybe it was just local superstition, or an old woman's habit of overprotectiveness. After all, I was here to relax, not to unravel mysteries. But the seed of doubt had been planted. That evening, as twilight deepened, I prepared a simple meal in Harold's kitchen. The familiar routine of chopping vegetables and stirring a pot soothed my nerves, but the silence outside was heavier than before. The neighbor's house loomed in the fading light, its windows shuttered tightly as though barring something inside. I caught myself checking the windows more frequently, ensuring they were locked and the curtains drawn. The woman's warning echoed in my mind. Stay upstairs tonight. Why had she chosen those exact words? Was there something dangerous lurking just beyond the garden fence? Later, as darkness swallowed the sky, I settled into the living room with a book, trying to distract myself. But the feeling of being watched lingered. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves seemed amplified in the quiet night. Suddenly, a faint tapping came from the front door. A rhythmic, deliberate sound that made me freeze. I glanced toward the entrance but saw nothing through the dim porch light. My pulse quickened and I moved closer, heart pounding, but the knocking stopped as abruptly as it started. I stood there for a moment, debating whether to investigate further. The rational part of me insisted it was probably a branch or a loose shutter. Yet another part whispered caution. reminding me of the neighbor's warning and the strange footsteps and voices from the night before. I locked the door again, double-checked all the windows and retreated upstairs, deciding to heed the advice I hadn't fully understood until now. The staircase creaked under my weight, the sound louder than usual in the stillness. Once in my room, I closed the door and pulled the curtains tight. The house felt smaller, safer up here, removed from whatever mysteries lay hidden below. I switched on a small lamp, casting a warm glow across the room, and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of the evening settle around me. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest echoes of voices, whispers I couldn't quite catch but that sent a shiver down my spine. I realized then that the quiet countryside was not as peaceful as it seemed. There were secrets buried in the darkness, and I was just beginning to glimpse them. I tried to steady my breathing and calm my racing thoughts. Tomorrow I would explore more, ask questions, and maybe even confront the neighbor. But for now, I would stay upstairs, safe behind locked doors and drawn curtains, listening to the night and wondering what it was trying to tell me. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting a pale glow across my bedroom. Sleep had been fitful and fragmented, haunted by the whispers and footsteps of the previous night. I lay awake for a long time, the neighbor's warning echoing in my mind. Stay upstairs tonight. It was a phrase I couldn't shake, a riddle that demanded answers. Determined to understand, I rose quietly and dressed, careful not to disturb the stillness of the house. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and damp earth. I moved through the rooms, noting how the morning sun breathed life into every corner, chasing away shadows and doubt. Yet even in the light, I felt the weight of something unseen, lurking just beyond my perception. I decided to explore more thoroughly, starting in the living room where the fire had burned low the night before. My gaze drifted downward, catching on a faint outline beneath a faded rug near the fireplace. Curious, I pulled the rug aside and found the edges of wooden floorboards worn and splintered. Kneeling, I ran my fingers along the grain and noticed strange symbols etched into the wood. Intricate, angular marks that seemed deliberately carved, rather than accidental scratches. The symbols were unfamiliar, their lines sharp and deliberate, arranged in patterns that suggested more than mere decoration. I traced them slowly, feeling an odd mixture of fascination and unease. What did they mean? Were they warnings? Protective charms? Or something darker? I searched the rest of the floor, uncovering more symbols hidden beneath the rugs and furniture. Their presence felt like a secret language, a code left by someone who had lived here long before Harold. My mind raced with questions. Had Harold known about these carvings? Did he understand their significance? Or had they been left behind by someone else entirely? My curiosity led me to the corner of the room where a heavy bookshelf stood pressed against the wall. Behind it, I discovered a narrow gap that revealed the outline of a doorframe. Heart pounding, I reached out and found a small rusted latch. With some effort, I managed to pry it open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase descending into the cellar below. The air that wafted up was cool and damp, carrying the sharp, earthy scent of soil and something else, something metallic and faintly acrid. A shiver ran down my spine as I peered into the darkness. The cellar was pitch black, its depths swallowed by shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. I hesitated, the neighbor's warning ringing in my ears. Staying upstairs had been her advice for a reason, and now I understood why. The cellar was not just a storage space. It was a threshold to something unknown and possibly dangerous. As I stood there, the silence was broken by a faint scratching noise, coming from somewhere deep below the floor. It was subtle at first, like the scratching of claws on wood, but it grew steadily louder, more insistent. I froze, listening intently as the sounds echoed up the stairs and into the daylight. The noise was unmistakable. Something was moving beneath the house, something alive. A wave of unease washed over me. The neighbor's caution suddenly made sense in a way that was impossible to ignore. Whatever dwelled beneath this old house was not a mere animal or a figment of superstition. It was something real, and it was close. I stepped back from the cellar entrance and closed the latch, the scrape of metal on wood ringing louder than I expected in the quiet room. My hands trembled slightly as I replaced the rug and looked around, searching for any other signs of disturbance. Outside, the garden seemed serene in the morning sun, but I knew better now. The house held secrets, dark and tangled, hidden beneath its cheerful surface. The symbols, the cellar, the scratching. all pieces of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. I found myself glancing toward the neighbor's house again, its shutters closed as if hiding from the world. The woman's warning had been more than mere caution. It was a plea, a shield against whatever threat lurked in the shadows. I realized then that this was no ordinary weekend getaway. The house was a trap of sorts, a place where the boundary between the familiar and the unknown blurred. I had stepped into a story far older and stranger than I could have imagined. Despite the fear knotting my stomach, I felt a strange resolve rising within me. I needed to understand what was beneath that floor, what the symbols meant and what lay in the cellar's depths. But I also knew I had to be careful. The scratching noise was a reminder that I was not alone, and whatever was down there was aware of me. I spent the rest of the morning searching the house for clues, examining every corner for signs of the cellar's history. In a dusty drawer I found an old journal, its leather cover cracked and worn. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with cramped handwriting that detailed the house's past, the people who had lived here, the strange occurrences, and the fear that had settled like a shadow over the property. One passage caught my eye. Beneath the floorboards the old ways linger. The marks protect us, but they also warn. Beware the things that come in the dark, for they do not sleep, and they do not forgive. The words resonated deeply, confirming my suspicions. The symbols were both shield and signpost, a fragile barrier against something ancient and relentless. I felt a chill as I closed the journal, the weight of the house's history pressing down on me. I understood now why the neighbor had urged me to stay upstairs. The cellar was a gateway, a place where the ordinary world met something else entirely. That evening, as twilight descended, I found myself drawn back to the cellar door. The scratching noise had returned, faint but persistent. I hesitated before unlocking the latch and descending the steps, the darkness swallowing me whole. With a flashlight in hand, I scanned the cellar's walls and floor, searching for the source of the sound. The air was thick with dampness and decay, and the beam of light flickered over rough stone and scattered debris. Then out of the shadows I caught sight of something, an old trapdoor partially hidden beneath a tattered rug. My heart pounded as I approached, the scratching growing louder now, almost frantic. I knelt and pulled at the trapdoor's edge, lifting it slowly to reveal a narrow passage descending further into the earth. The passage was narrow and cramped, lined with roots and dirt. The scratching came from deep within, a sound both desperate and menacing. I swallowed hard, knowing that whatever awaited below was not just a threat to the house, but to me. I closed the trapdoor carefully, retreating back up the stairs. The cellar was a threshold I was not yet ready to cross, but the discovery only deepened the mystery, and the danger. As I locked the latch behind me, I felt the full weight of the neighbor's warning settle into my bones. The house was alive with secrets, and I was caught in its grip. There was no turning back now. The encounter with the neighbor, Mrs. Graves, lingered in my mind like a shadow I couldn't quite shake. Her warning to stay upstairs tonight had seemed cryptic at first, but after the discoveries beneath the floorboards, her words took on a weight I couldn't ignore. I found myself returning to her words over and over, trying to understand her motives. Was she just a meddlesome local, or was there something deeper driving her concern? I decided to seek her out, hoping to bridge the gap between suspicion and understanding. That afternoon I walked cautiously toward her house, the worn path between our properties crunching softly underfoot. The imposing wooden structure loomed ahead, its dark shutters closed tight as if guarding secrets I was desperate to uncover. When I reached her door, I hesitated before knocking. Almost immediately, it opened a crack, and there she stood, silver hair pulled back tightly, eyes sharp and assessing. "You again," she said, her tone guarded but not unfriendly. "I wanted to talk," I said carefully, "about the house and your warning. I think I'm beginning to understand there's more going on here than I realized." She sighed, the lines on her face deepening as if bearing the weight of years of worry. "It's not easy to explain," she murmured, stepping aside to let me in. The interior was dim and cozy, filled with the scent of burning wood and old paper. Shelves lined with books and jars of herbs gave the room a timeless feel. As I entered, she closed the door behind me and gestured toward a worn armchair. "Sit," she said. "There's much you don't know." I settled into the chair, watching as she moved deliberately to a small table and poured 2 cups of tea. When she returned, she handed me a cup, her eyes never leaving mine. "This house," she began, "has long been a place of strange occurrences. The cellar, the symbols beneath the floorboards, they're all part of a history that's been kept hidden." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. "Those symbols," she said, "are protective marks. They're meant to keep something at bay, something that dwells beneath the earth, in the cellar and beyond. It's not a beast you'd recognize, not an animal or a ghost, but something older, something that feeds on fear and darkness." Her words sent a chill through me. I'd felt the presence of something unseen, but to hear it described so plainly made it more real, and more terrifying. "Why didn't your uncle tell me?" I asked. "Does he know about this?" Mrs. Graves shook her head. "Harold prefers to keep his distance, to live quietly without stirring the past. But the house watches and it waits. Whatever lies beneath does not forgive trespassers or those who ignore the warnings." I swallowed hard, feeling the gravity of the situation settle over me. "So your advice to stay upstairs wasn't just superstition. It was a real warning." She nodded solemnly. "Exactly. The cellar is dangerous. The scratching sounds you heard, that's it moving restless. The protective marks only work if the boundaries are respected." I felt a surge of conflicting emotions: fear, curiosity, and a strange sense of respect for the unknown. It was clear that Mrs. Graves wasn't a meddler but a guardian, someone who had witnessed the house's dark history and sought to shield others from harm. "Is there anything I can do?" I asked quietly. "Anything to help or protect myself?" She hesitated, then reached into a small wooden box on the table. Inside lay a handful of dried herbs and a simple silver charm shaped like a crescent moon. "Keep this with you," she said, pressing the charm into my hand. "It won't stop what's beneath, but it offers protection, enough to keep you safe while you're here." I clutched the charm, feeling its cool weight. It was a tangible link to something beyond my understanding, a symbol of the fragile boundary between safety and danger. Mrs. Graves leaned back, her eyes distant. "I've lived next door for decades, watching and waiting. I've lost friends to the darkness beneath this land. You're lucky to have made it this far without harm." Her words settled heavily in the room, the silence stretching as I absorbed the history and warning she had shared. I realized then that my weekend retreat was no ordinary escape. I was entangled in a story much larger and darker than I'd imagined. The house was a threshold to something ancient, and I was caught between worlds. As I left Mrs. Graves' home, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the garden, I felt a newfound respect for her and the house's mystery. Her warning was not born of fear but of experience, a caution born from survival. I returned to Harold's cottage, clutching the silver charm and replaying her words in my mind. The cellar was a place I needed to avoid, at least for now, and the symbols beneath the floorboards were not just decoration but a fragile shield. That night I stayed upstairs as advised, the charm resting against my chest beneath my shirt. The house seemed quieter, as if the tension had eased slightly. Yet I knew the danger remained, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the next moment to reveal itself. I understood now that my role was not just to observe but to respect the boundaries set by those who had come before me. Mrs. Graves had given me a glimpse of the house's true nature, and I was determined to honor her warning. The weekend had become a test, not just of courage but of wisdom and restraint. And as I lay in bed, the silver charm cool against my skin, I resolved to remain vigilant, to listen closely to the house's whispers, and to respect the shadows that danced just beyond the light. That night, I resolved to take Mrs. Graves' warning seriously. The unease that had settled over the house was no longer a vague feeling. It was a tangible presence, lurking just beneath the floorboards and within the shadows. I couldn't ignore it, and I certainly couldn't afford to be careless. If I was going to make it through the weekend, I would have to be vigilant, prepared, and cautious. I started by barricading the staircase that led down to the cellar. The old wooden door was heavy, but I could tell it wasn't built to keep something out. It was more a barrier for those who dared venture inside. I moved a sturdy armchair, an old trunk, and even a small table against the door, creating a layered blockade. The makeshift barricade felt fragile, but it was something, a physical boundary between me and whatever lurked below. Next, I gathered household items to fashion alarms. I tied strings between doorknobs, stretched thin wire across the hallway, and rigged a few cans to clatter loudly if disturbed. It was a rudimentary system, but in the silence of the house, even the faintest noise would alert me. I tested each setup, listening to the echoes as the cans clanged against the floor, imagining how effective they might be if the cellar door creaked open unexpectedly. I kept my phone close at all times, ensuring it was fully charged and within reach. Although the countryside was remote, the signal was surprisingly strong, and I wanted to be able to call for help if necessary. I even saved emergency contacts under quick dial numbers, mentally preparing for the worst. Throughout the evening, I recorded the strange noises that had unsettled me since arriving. The faint scratching beneath the floorboards, the creaking of unseen footsteps, and the occasional whisper of the wind through the trees, all captured on my phone's microphone. Listening back, the sounds were eerie and unnatural, hinting at a presence just beyond sight. The house felt alive with tension, as if it held its breath alongside me. Every creak and groan was amplified. Every shadow seemed to flicker with hidden motion. I found myself jumping at the slightest noise, heart racing but determined to stay calm. I spent the night in the upstairs bedroom, the silver charm from Mrs. Graves resting against my chest beneath my shirt. Its cool weight was a small comfort in the oppressive darkness. I kept the lamp on, casting a warm circle of light around me, but even that felt insufficient against the creeping shadows pressing at the windows. Several times I heard soft knocks on the walls and faint tapping at the window panes. When I looked, there was nothing there, just the rustling of leaves stirred by the night breeze. Yet the sounds felt deliberate, as if trying to communicate or warn. I whispered reassurances to myself, repeating Mrs. Graves' words about respect and caution. The house demanded vigilance, and I intended to give it. I refused to be caught unprepared. At one point, the scratching beneath the floor intensified, sharp, insistent, and close. I pressed my ear to the wooden floor, trying to pinpoint the source. The sound shifted, moving slowly as if something was pacing or circling beneath me. My skin prickled with unease, but I refused to let panic take hold. Instead, I pulled out my phone and began recording a video, speaking softly into the camera. I wanted to document everything, the noises, the atmosphere, the warnings, so that if anything happened, there would be evidence. I spoke clearly, describing what I was experiencing and reminding myself to stay calm. After the video, I sat in silence, listening to the house and waiting. Hours passed with only the occasional creak or rustle, but the tension never fully dissipated. I felt like a sentinel, guarding the fragile boundary between safety and the unknown. As dawn approached, the first light filtered through the curtains, softening the darkness. The scratching noises faded, replaced by the gentle chirping of birds outside. Relief washed over me, but I remained alert, knowing the danger wasn't gone, just momentarily subdued. I thought about Mrs. Graves and her decades of experience living next door, silently watching and protecting. Her warnings had been my lifeline, and I resolved to heed them fully. The house was not a place to be taken lightly. That morning I made a mental list of precautions for the rest of my stay. Keep the cellar door barricaded, maintain the alarms, stay vigilant, and respect the boundaries set long ago. I would not venture downstairs, not without proper understanding or guidance. Though exhaustion weighed heavily on me, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. I was no longer a helpless visitor caught in an unfolding mystery. I was an active participant, taking steps to protect myself and unravel the house's secrets on my own terms. The experience had shifted something inside me. The quiet countryside was no longer just a refuge from the city's chaos. It was a place of hidden dangers and ancient mysteries that demanded respect and courage. As I prepared to face another night, I knew I would need all my wits and resolve to navigate the darkness ahead. The house had revealed a glimpse of its true nature, and now it was up to me to remain vigilant, protect myself, and survive. Just as the first pale light of dawn began to seep into the sky, a soft knock echoed on my bedroom door. Startled, I sat up, clutching the silver charm beneath my shirt. The night had been long, filled with the restless noises beneath the floorboards and the occasional creak that sent my heart racing. I wasn't sure if I had truly slept or simply drifted in and out of uneasy awareness. "Ethan," came a familiar, gentle voice. It was Mrs. Graves. I opened the door to find her standing there, the early morning light casting a glow around her silver hair. Her eyes held a mixture of relief and concern. "I thought I should come by before you left," she said quietly. I wanted to explain a little more about what you've experienced. I nodded, grateful for her company and eager to understand. Please, I said, stepping aside to let her in. We moved to the living room, where the first rays of sunshine filtered through the curtains. The house felt different in daylight, less menacing though still heavy with the weight of its secrets. Mrs. Graves settled into the armchair, folding her hands in her lap. This house, she began, has a long history. The cellar, the symbols beneath the floorboards, they're not just old superstitions. They're warnings and protections against something dangerous that roams beneath the earth. I listened intently as she continued. Some say it's a wild animal, something feral and territorial. Others believe it's something supernatural, an ancient presence tied to the land itself. Whatever it is, it's been here for generations, and it doesn't take kindly to strangers. Her words sent a shiver through me, but I appreciated her honesty. The scratching noises, that's it? She nodded solemnly. Yes. It moves beneath the house, restless and watchful. The symbols are meant to keep it contained, but those protections are fragile. That's why I urged you to stay upstairs last night. The cellar is a dangerous place. I thought back to the barricade I'd made, the alarms I'd rigged, and the charm resting against my chest. I'm glad I listened, I admitted. It felt like something was watching me. Mrs. Graves smiled faintly. You were right to trust your instincts. Many don't, and they pay the price. I've seen what happens to those who venture too far into the darkness. Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken stories and warnings. I realized how fortunate I was to have her guidance. I'm planning to leave today, I said softly. I appreciate your help, and your warning. I just want to get back to the city to safety. She nodded, understanding. It's wise. This place is not meant for everyone. But remember, respect the land and the house's history if you ever return. It demands it. Before she left, she handed me a small envelope. Inside are more charms and some herbs, she explained. Keep them with you, and may they offer protection on your journey. I thanked her sincerely, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for her kindness and wisdom. Later, I contacted my Uncle Harold to explain everything. He was surprised but not entirely shocked. The house has always been a bit unusual, he admitted. I've kept my distance and told you little because I didn't want to worry you. But I'm glad you're safe. I promised to return his key and cut my weekend short, feeling a mixture of relief and lingering unease. As I packed my bag and prepared to leave the countryside behind, I took one last look at the old cottage. The sun was fully risen now, casting light on the garden and softening the edges of the imposing neighbor's house. I knew I would carry the memory of this place with me. The warnings, the mysteries, and the quiet kindness of a stranger who had saved me from harm. Driving away, I felt a profound appreciation for the safety of my own home, and a newfound respect for the unseen forces that dwell beyond the familiar. The experience had been unsettling, but it had also taught me to listen, to trust warnings, to respect boundaries, and to acknowledge that some places hold secrets best left undisturbed. I resolved to carry those lessons forward, grateful for the chance to escape danger and return to the comfort of the city, where the only shadows I faced were my own. Back in the city, the familiar cacophony of traffic, chatter, and neon signs felt more like a balm than a burden. I had returned from the countryside with a profound sense of relief, and a story that felt too strange, too heavy to share with most people. My apartment, with its cramped corners and flickering overhead lights, suddenly seemed like a sanctuary, a place where the only shadows were cast by the everyday hustle of urban life. Yet, the memories of that weekend lingered, etched deeply into my consciousness. I found myself reflecting on the experience constantly. The quiet house perched on the edge of the wild, the chilling warnings from Mrs. Graves, the cryptic symbols beneath the floorboards, and the restless presence in the cellar. It was as if the countryside had pulled back a curtain, revealing a world just beyond the veil of normalcy, one that most people never saw or acknowledged. The contrast between the city and that remote place was stark. Here life moved fast, distractions were abundant, and dangers were mostly visible and tangible. There, in the silence and shadows of the old cottage, something ancient and unknowable lurked beneath the surface, demanding respect and caution. I was grateful to be back among the familiar noise, but I also felt a newfound wariness toward the unknown. I resolved to be more cautious in the future, especially when venturing into unfamiliar places. The neighbor's warning had been more than just superstition. It was a lifeline. Mrs. Graves, with her quiet wisdom and protective charm, had saved me from a darkness I barely understood. I promised myself I would listen more carefully to local advice, to intuition, and to the subtle signs that often go unnoticed. At work, I found it hard to concentrate. The creative projects I once approached with enthusiasm now seemed trivial compared to the mysteries I'd uncovered. I started jotting down notes and sketches, capturing the symbols I'd found and the layout of the house. It wasn't just a story to tell. It was a puzzle I yearned to understand better. Though I rarely spoke of it openly, the experience changed me. It sharpened my senses, made me more attuned to the world's hidden layers. I noticed the small signs others might miss, the flicker of a shadow, the distant echo of a strange sound. The city's noise was comforting, but I knew that beneath even the busiest streets, secrets waited quietly. Occasionally, I would touch the silver charm Mrs. Graves had given me, a small talisman that felt heavier with meaning than its size suggested. It was a reminder of the kindness of a stranger, the thin line between safety and danger, and the importance of respect, in places both wild and civilized. I thought often of Mrs. Graves, hoping she remained well in her quiet house beside the old cottage. Her bravery and knowledge had been my shield, and I carried that gratitude quietly with me. The weekend had been a test of courage and caution, of belief and skepticism. It taught me that some places hold histories and forces that demand reverence, and that sometimes, the kindness of a stranger can mean the difference between safety and harm. As I settled back into my routine, I felt a renewed appreciation for the simple comforts of home, the familiar faces, the steady rhythm of city life, and the ability to close my door at night without fear. The experience left me with a story I would carry forever. A tale of respect, caution, and the unexpected kindness that can emerge from the most unlikely of neighbors. It was a reminder that sometimes, survival depends not just on strength, but on listening, learning, and honoring the unseen. And as the city's lights flickered outside my window, I knew I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with the lessons of that quiet house on the edge of the wild, and the enduring memory of a warning well heeded.